Mother was standing in the doorway of my condo, wearing my gray cashmere cardigan, when I came home from my overnight work trip. Not her cardigan. Mine. The one I bought myself last Christmas. The one I'd been saving for cold mornings with coffee on the balcony. She had the sleeves pushed up and her arms crossed, and she looked at me the way you look at a stranger who's knocked on the wrong door. "You should have called ahead," she said. I had my rolling carry-on in one hand and my laptop bag cutting into my shoulder, and I just stood there in the hallway of the 14th floor of my own building, staring at her, trying to make the picture in front of me make sense. "Mom, this is my apartment. Your sister needs to rest. The doctor said no stress. Mom, you can stay at the Marriott on 5th. You can afford it." And then she stepped back and closed the door. I stood in that hallway for probably 2 full minutes before I moved. I wasn't angry yet. I was just blank. The kind of blank that happens when something so far outside your understanding occurs that your brain simply refuses to process it. Let me back up, because if I just tell you what happened without the context, you'll think I'm leaving something out. I promise you I'm not. I'm 31. I work in healthcare IT, specifically in cybersecurity for hospital networks. It's not glamorous, but it pays well. Better than well, honestly. I've been good with money since I was 19 and got my first paycheck, and my father sat me down and said, "Save before you spend, always." That's actually the last genuinely useful thing he ever taught me. I bought my condo 3 years ago. It's a 2-bedroom unit in a mid-rise in Denver, Colorado. I paid $387,000 for it, put 20% down with my own savings, and I've been paying the mortgage alone ever since. My name is on the deed. My name is on the deed. My name is on the loan. Nobody helped me. Not emotionally, not financially, not in any way. My sister is 26. Her name is, I'll call her by her role here because honestly that's all she's been to my parents for the past decade. My sister. She's always been the favorite. That's not bitterness talking, that's just the family record. When I graduated college, my parents took her to Disney World because she'd gotten a B+ in her algebra class. When I got my first real job offer, my mother called to tell me my sister had been cast in a community theater production. When I closed on my condo, my father called 2 weeks later to ask if I could front my sister $4,000 for a used car because she'd had a fender bender. I said no to that one. I said no to that one. I said no, and my mother didn't speak to me for 3 weeks. My sister is not a bad person. I want to say that clearly. She's young and she's been handed a set of expectations from my parents that's done her no favors. She's been told her whole life that someone will take care of her, so she's never learned to take care of herself. But the choices she made in the spring of this year, and the choices my parents made, those are on them, not on me. In January, my sister's boyfriend left her. She was 8 weeks pregnant. I found out about all of this secondhand, through a cousin, because by that point, I'd been keeping deliberate distance from my family. We weren't estranged exactly, but I'd stopped making myself available for every financial emergency and emotional explosion. And they'd responded by including me less and less until I was basically just a number they called when they needed something. My parents' solution to my sister's situation was apparently straightforward in their minds. She needed a place to stay. She couldn't afford her own apartment. My condo had a 2nd bedroom. Nobody asked me. I want to be very clear about that. Nobody called. Nobody texted. Nobody said, "Hey, we're thinking about this. What do you think?" My parents drove 4 hours from Pueblo to Denver, used the spare key I'd given them 2 years ago for actual emergencies, let themselves in, and moved my sister into my 2nd bedroom while I was in Portland for a 4-day work conference. That's what I came home to. That's why my mother was standing in my doorway in my cardigan. I went to the Marriott. I know. I've read the comments on videos like mine, and I know exactly what you're thinking. Trust me, I've said it to myself 1,000 times since. But I was exhausted from the flight, and I was in shock, and I told myself I'd go get a hotel room and think clearly and come back in the morning with a plan. I didn't have a plan yet. I just needed to not stand in that hallway anymore. I checked in, I sat on the hotel bed, and I called my father. He answered on the 2nd ring, which told me he'd been waiting. "I know you're upset," he said, before I even spoke. "Dad, what did you do? She has nowhere to go. She's pregnant. It's 22 degrees. She can come stay with you and Mom. You have a whole house." Silence. "Dad." The commute to her prenatal appointments would be, "You drove 4 hours to break into my home. You can drive 4 hours to take your daughter to a prenatal appointment. More silence. Then you're not being family right now. I hung up. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the hotel bed, and I looked at the ceiling, and I thought about every time I'd said yes when I should have said no. The $1,200 I lent my father in 2021 that was never repaid. That Thanksgiving I spent alone because I couldn't afford to fly home and nobody offered to help with a ticket. But they FaceTimed me from the table, and my sister had gotten the new laptop as an early Christmas gift, and she held it up to show me. The birthday card my mother sent me last year that said, "Hope this year is as good as you deserve." And I'd held it for a long time, wondering if she meant it the way it could be meant. In the morning, I called a locksmith and had the locks changed. My mother called me 47 minutes later. I know because I was watching the clock. You changed the locks. I did. Your sister can't get in. No, she can't. She is pregnant and it is February and you changed the locks on your own sister. I changed the locks on your own apartment. Her being inside it was never something I agreed to. My mother's voice dropped into that register I'd known since childhood. The low, controlled tone that meant she was about to say something she calculated to hurt. You have always been like this, since you were small. So closed off, so cold. I didn't answer that. There's nothing to answer to it. It's designed to make you defend yourself, to pull you into a conversation about your character instead of the actual facts. And I was 31 years old and I'd finally learned not to take that bait. The locks are changed, I said. I'd like my spare key back. You can mail it. I didn't wait for a response. What happened next, I didn't expect, and I should have, because I knew my parents and I knew how they operated. I just thought, I don't know what I thought, that they'd be angry and then they'd handle it themselves. That reality would eventually set in. Instead, my father called my building's leasing office. Here's the thing about my building. I own my unit. I'm not a renter. The leasing office has no authority over me or my property. But my father apparently told them there was a family situation involving a pregnant woman who'd been locked out in winter. And someone in that office, I still don't know who, buzzed my sister and my mother back up to my floor with a temporary key card as a courtesy. I found out because my neighbor texted me. She'd seen them in the hallway with bags. I drove back to my building. I went upstairs. My sister was sitting on my couch with a duffel bag, and my mother was in my kitchen making coffee like she lived there. This has to stop, I said. My sister looked at the floor. My mother didn't look up from the coffee maker. Mom, I need you to leave. Both of you need to leave. The building let us in, my mother said, as if that settled it. The building doesn't own my condo. I do. You're trespassing. That's when I called the police. I want to say this clearly because I know people will ask. Yes, I called them. An officer came. And here's where I learned something I genuinely did not know. In Colorado, if someone has been residing in a space long enough to establish a pattern of habitation, the process to remove them isn't as simple as calling the police and having them walked out. It depends on the circumstances. The officer was kind about it. He explained that since there was evidence my family had been staying there, bags, food in the fridge, personal items, it could be considered a tenant situation and might require formal legal process to resolve. I stood in my own living room and listened to a police officer tell me that removing my own family from my own property might require an eviction proceeding. My mother heard every word, and I watched something shift in her face. She thought she'd found something. I got an attorney within 48 hours. Her name is, I'll call her my attorney, because that's what matters. She was recommended by a colleague at work, and she had 20 years of experience in Colorado property law. And she had the kind of calm confidence that made me feel like maybe I wasn't completely losing my mind. She reviewed everything, the deed, the mortgage documents, the title. My ownership was unambiguous, but she also confirmed what the police officer had said, because my family had been in the unit for several days and had received implicit access through the building. They could potentially claim enough residents to complicate a self-help eviction. The correct path was a formal unlawful detainer proceeding. How long? I asked. If they contest it, weeks. If they don't, faster. They'll contest it, I said. She looked at me and nodded once. Then we prepare accordingly. What my parents did next was the thing that changed everything from a family dispute into something much larger. My father hired an attorney of his own, a man I'll call the other attorney, someone who apparently specialized in what my attorney later described as creative pressure tactics. This attorney sent me a letter within a week. The letter alleged that I had verbally promised my sister a place to stay during her pregnancy, that this verbal agreement constituted a lease, and that by changing the locks I had performed an illegal lockout. It demanded $15,000 in damages and requested I vacate the premises for 30 days to allow my sister to settle. I read that letter 4 times. Vacate my own home. Pay $15,000. Based on a conversation that never happened, I called my attorney. They're bluffing, she said, but let them build the record. Every move they make is going to matter. She was already thinking about what was coming. I wasn't, not yet. I was still in the phase where I thought this was a family problem that had gotten out of hand. She understood before I did that it had become something else. Here's what my attorney found when she started pulling records. My father, it turned out, had significant debt. Not ordinary debt, the kind that happens slowly and compounds and gets hidden. He'd taken out a personal loan in 2022 using my name as a co-signer. I didn't know this. I had never agreed to this. My signature on the document, when my attorney obtained a copy, was, and I'm going to be calm about this, not my signature. Somebody had signed my name. The loan was for $41,000. He had also, in the past 18 months, opened 2 credit accounts with my information. I found out when my attorney recommended I pull all 3 of my credit reports. There they were, a Visa card with an $8,000 balance, a home improvement line of credit with $14,500 drawn, both opened in my name, neither one authorized by me. I sat at my kitchen table. The kitchen table in the hotel I was still partly living out of because I didn't want to be in my condo while my family was there. And I looked at those credit reports, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not heartbreak. Something colder than that. The specific grief of realizing that someone you loved was capable of something you had genuinely believed they weren't. My attorney filed the unlawful detainer. She also called in a colleague who handled fraud cases. The eviction proceeding moved to a hearing. My parents showed up with their attorney. My sister was there too, quiet, not meeting my eyes. My attorney presented the deed, the title, the complete ownership record, not one comma of ambiguity. Their attorney made the verbal agreement. The judge reviewed the documentation my attorney had compiled and looked at me over his glasses. "This is your property," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, Your Honor." He looked at their attorney. "What is the basis for this claim?" Their attorney began the verbal lease argument. The judge let him finish. Then he looked down at the papers again. "There's no written agreement, no financial exchange, no documentation of any kind. It was an oral agreement, Your Honor, established under conditions of, you're asking me to remove a legal property owner from her own home based on an unwitnessed verbal claim." The room was quiet. "Motion denied," the judge said. "The respondents are ordered to vacate within 72 hours. My sister started crying. My mother reached over and took her hand. My father stared at the table. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to say that because I think people expect you to feel triumphant in that moment, and I didn't. I just felt tired. The kind of tired that lives in your bones. But it wasn't over yet. My attorney had, during the eviction proceedings, filed a separate complaint regarding the fraudulent credit accounts and the forged co-signer signature. This went to a different venue. The fraud complaint went to law enforcement, specifically to a detective in the Financial Crimes Unit. I'll tell you what I was told. Once the fraud referral was in, things moved faster than I expected. Financial fraud investigations have their own momentum, especially when the documentation is clear and the amounts breach certain thresholds. $41,000 on a forged signature is not a small matter. The combined unauthorized credit accounts added another $22,000. My father was contacted by the detective within 2 weeks of the eviction ruling. My mother called me the night after that contact. It was the first time she'd called me since the hearing. Her voice was different, not the controlled, calculating tone, not the quiet cruelty, just scared. She sounded like the mother I remembered from when I was very small, before I understood how things actually worked in our family. "We need to talk," she said. "I know. Your father made some mistakes. Mom. He was trying to help your sister. He didn't think through. He forged my signature on a loan document. That's not a mistake, Mom. That's a crime." She was quiet for a long time. "Are you really going to do this? To your own family?" And there it was. The final move in the playbook. After everything, after my home, after my credit, after my money, the question was whether I was going to do this to my family. As if I was the one who had started it. As if the bill for what they'd done was supposed to come to me. Yes, I said. I am. I want to be honest about what happened with my father. He was charged. The process took months, the way these things do. There were negotiations and hearings, and I had to give a statement and sit across from a table where my father looked at me with an expression I'll probably carry for the rest of my life. He took a plea. He didn't go to prison. His attorney negotiated a sentence of probation, restitution, and mandatory financial counseling, with a suspended jail term contingent on compliance. The loans were dealt with. The fraudulent accounts were closed and the disputed amounts were addressed through the creditors with documentation from law enforcement. My credit score, which had dropped significantly, began to recover. My sister had her baby in May. A girl. I know this because my cousin sent me a photo. I haven't met her. Maybe someday. That part is still open, still raw, still something I don't have words for. My mother and I don't speak. It's not a dramatic silence. No formal declaration, no final blow-up. We just stopped. She stopped calling after the plea, and I didn't call her, and the weeks became months. My aunt reached out once to say my mother was really struggling, and I said I hoped she got the support she needed, and I meant it. I genuinely meant it. But I cannot be the person who provides that support. I have used up everything I had on surviving what they did, and I have nothing left to give in that direction. I still live in my condo. I got a new spare key made. I gave it to my neighbor, the one who texted me when my family came back with bags. She's been my neighbor for 2 years, and she's never once shown up wearing my cardigan. I refinished the balcony last fall. I have a small table out there and I drink my coffee in the mornings, and sometimes I think about the version of the story where I didn't hire an attorney, where I kept saying yes, where I let the guilt and the you're not being family right now slowly hollow me out until there was nothing left to take. I don't live in that version of the story. Here's what I want you to take from this, if you take anything. The people who love you don't make you prove it by sacrificing yourself. That's not love. That's leverage. And the moment you learn to tell the difference, really learn it, in your body, not just your head, is the moment you stop being available to be used. The cardigan, by the way, was still in my closet when I finally got back into my apartment. My mother had folded it and put it back. I held it for a second when I found it. Then I donated it. Some things you just don't want back. I think about cause and effect a lot now. Not in a dramatic way. Not like I sit there replaying everything with some grand philosophical lens. More like the quiet kind of accounting you do when the dust finally settles and you're just left with the actual shape of things. My father didn't forge my signature because he was evil. I've had to sit with that. He did it because he'd spent decades learning that there were no consequences for taking from me. Every time I said yes when I meant no, every loan I gave that was never repaid, every birthday I spent alone while they celebrated my sister. Each of those moments taught him something. They taught him that I was available, that the cost of using me was zero, so when a bigger need appeared, he just scaled up the behavior he'd already practiced 100 times in smaller ways. That's the part nobody wants to say out loud. We teach people how to treat us. Not because we deserve bad treatment. I want to be clear about that. But because our responses over time form a pattern, and other people learn that pattern whether we intend for them to or not. I spent years responding to my family's demands with accommodation, and they learned that accommodation was what I did. When I finally stopped, they didn't understand it. It genuinely confused them. My mother's voice on the phone that last night. The scared, disoriented voice that was real. She wasn't performing. She actually didn't understand what had changed. What changed was me. That's the only honest answer. The intelligence part of this, and I mean that in the practical sense, not the flattering one, was learning to read what was actually happening instead of what I wanted to be happening. For a long time, I told myself that my parents were flawed, but loving. That the imbalance was unintentional, that if I just gave a little more, they'd eventually meet me somewhere in the middle. That story was comfortable. It was also wrong. The evidence was always there. I just kept choosing not to look at it. The moment I looked, really looked, the way my attorney looked at those credit reports, the picture was completely unambiguous. The resolve part came after the intelligence. Once I saw it clearly, I had to decide whether I was going to act on what I saw or find another reason not to. That's where most people get stuck, I think. Seeing the truth is hard. Acting on it when the truth involves your own parents, your own family, the people you spent your whole childhood trying to earn approval from, that's a different kind of hard entirely. It cost me something real. I'm not going to pretend it didn't. But here's what I kept coming back to in those months. The version of me who stayed quiet, who absorbed the cost, who let it continue. That version of me was also paying. She was just paying in a currency that didn't show up on a credit report. She was paying in self-respect, in safety, and the slow erosion of knowing that her home was actually hers. Every action lands somewhere. My father's actions landed on my credit, my finances, my sense of security. My actions, filing the complaint, hiring the attorney, saying yes when I meant yes and no when I meant no, those landed too. They landed on my father's record, on the shape of my family going forward, on the quiet mornings I now have on my balcony with coffee and no one standing in my doorway wearing my things. The cardigan is gone. The condo is mine. That's the whole equation, really.